Okay, so let's talk about a war that happened over 150 years ago. But in a lot of ways, it's the war that created the world we live in now. We're going to break down why the Crimean War is called the first truly modern war and how it completely changed everything.
But what does that even mean, a modern war? Is it all about the weapons, how fast the news travels, or is it something else? Well, as we're about to see, the Crimean War was really the first time all of these things crashed into each other on the battlefield, creating a totally new and much deadlier kind of conflict.
Before this, war was almost predictable. You had soldiers in bright uniforms, marching in neat lines, firing old muskets that were barely accurate. But the Crimean War was a brutal wake-up call. Suddenly, you've got rifles that are deadly accurate and news traveling at the speed of electricity. The old rules just didn't apply anymore.
So, what kicked this whole thing off? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was this perfect storm of different countries wanting more power, a lot of fear, and one giant empire that was starting to look a little shaky.
Think of it like this. Russia was trying to expand its power south to get access to the Mediterranean Sea. But Britain and France saw that and got nervous, thinking it would mess with their global trade routes. Then, you throw in a religious argument and a once powerful empire that's losing its grip, and boom, you've got a recipe for war. When the talking stopped, the Russian army started marching.
Right at the center of all of this was the Ottoman Empire. For hundreds of years, it was a massive superpower. But by the 1850s, other European leaders were calling it the sick man of Europe. And that weakness? It was like blood in the water. Other countries saw their chance to grab a piece of the pie for themselves.
And this brings us to a really key idea in politics, the balance of power. Britain and France weren't exactly best friends with the Ottoman Empire, but they were absolutely terrified of Russia becoming too strong and dominating the region. So they jumped into the war, mostly to keep Russia in check and protect their own power.
All right, now we get to the part that really earns this war its modern title. The technology that showed up in Crimea didn't just tweak a few things, it completely rewrote the rulebook for how wars were fought.
For the first time, an ordinary soldier could hit a target with incredible accuracy from really far away. Just imagine, generations of military tactics, strategies that had won battles for centuries, were suddenly useless. They basically became death traps overnight.
The big game changer was this thing called the Minié rifle. See, old muskets were pretty much useless beyond 100 yards. But this new rifle had these grooves inside the barrel. It's called rifling. That made the bullet spin, kind of like a quarterback throwing a perfect spiral. This meant a soldier could hit a target from 5 football fields away. Suddenly, a heroic cavalry charge wasn't heroic anymore. It was just a suicide mission. And this tech revolution wasn't just happening on land. The main fighting took place on a peninsula in the Black Sea, so controlling the water was absolutely essential for moving troops and supplies. And out on the sea, new technology gave one side a huge advantage. Yeah, forget sailing ships that had to wait for the wind. Now you had steam-powered warships covered in iron armor that could go wherever they wanted, whenever they wanted. Plus, they fired explosive shells that would rip massive holes in old wooden ships instead of just bouncing off. They even used the first underwater mines. Naval combat was never going to be the same.
And all this deadly new technology really came to a head at the Siege of Sevastopol. This wasn't just one battle. It was a miserable year-long grind. Both sides dug miles and miles of trenches, living under constant artillery fire. It was just this brutal, grinding stalemate that gave the world a terrifying preview of what World War I would look like 60 years later.
But the war wasn't only being fought with guns and cannons. For the very first time in history, a war was also being fought with information, with news reports flashing across newspaper headlines hundreds of miles away, almost in real time.
Just look at this. Before the war, it would take 3 weeks for news from the battlefield to reach London by ship. 3 weeks. But now, with the brand new electric telegraph, a battle report could be printed in a London newspaper in just 5 hours. Information was literally moving faster than the armies themselves.
And that incredible speed meant that the world's first ever war correspondents could send back brutally honest reports about the awful reality soldiers were facing. The public back home wasn't just reading about glorious victories anymore. Now they were reading about terrible leadership and horrific suffering. And this put a whole new kind of pressure on governments to actually do something about it.
Now, as deadly as those new rifles were, the biggest killer in this war wasn't a bullet. Nope.
For the average soldier, the most dangerous enemy they faced was an invisible one that was lurking in their own camps and hospitals: disease. Get ready for this number. A staggering 80% of the soldiers who died in the Crimean War were killed by diseases like cholera and dysentery, not by fighting. The military hospitals were just filthy, disorganized nightmares. A simple infection that we could treat easily today was basically a death sentence. But this absolute crisis also created heroes. Two incredible women, Florence Nightingale and Mary Seacole, showed up right in the middle of this disaster and completely revolutionized military medicine. And they proved that one of the most powerful weapons against disease was something shockingly simple: basic hygiene. Nightingale's methods seem like common sense to us today, right? But back then, they were totally revolutionary. She and her team of nurses just focused on the basics: scrubbing the hospitals clean, letting in fresh air, and making sure the soldiers had decent food to eat. These simple changes dropped the death rate like a rock and helped establish nursing as the respected profession it is today.
So after a year of this brutal siege, the Russians finally abandoned Sevastopol, and the war ended in 1856. But its impact on history? Well, that was just getting started.
The Crimean War was truly a war of firsts. I mean, it was the first time the telegraph was used in a major war, the first time you had war correspondents and even photographers right on the front lines, the first time there was an organized professional nursing corps, the first time rifled muskets were widely used, and even the first time a medal like the Victoria Cross was given to common soldiers just for being brave. You can really think of this war as a bridge. It connected the old Napoleonic way of fighting, with cavalry charges and colorful uniforms, to the grim industrial warfare of the 20th century. Every army in the world had to rethink everything. They realized that your factories, your supply lines, and your medical care were now just as important as how brave your soldiers were.
And really, that's the biggest lesson here. The Crimean War proved that a single leap in technology can change warfare forever. So it makes you wonder, right? What's the Minié rifle of our time? As we see technologies like drones and artificial intelligence showing up on modern battlefields, the lessons from that first modern war seem more relevant than ever.